Let me describe a woman you might have met. She walks into a room and owns it. Confident, put together, successful career, great style, sharp wit. She has opinions about everything and delivers them with the kind of certainty that makes people nod along. She's impressive, intimidating even. And when she shows interest in you, it feels like winning something. Like you've been selected. Like out of all the men she could choose, she chose you. 6 months later, you're sitting in your car outside your own apartment, gathering the courage to go inside. Not because something dramatic happened, but because you know that when you walk through that door, the evaluation begins. Did you text back fast enough? Did you pick up the right groceries? Did you remember the thing she mentioned 3 days ago that she'll definitely bring up again? You're exhausted, not from work, from living with someone who turned your relationship into a performance review that never ends and you're always failing. The woman who seemed like the catch has become the trap. The confidence you admired has become control. The high standards you respected have become weapons. The sharpness you found attractive has been turned on you relentlessly until you can't remember who you were before you started trying to please someone who can't be pleased. Today we're going to dissect the dominant woman. Not every woman with confidence or success. Not every woman with opinions or standards. The specific type who uses dominance as a relationship strategy. Who needs to control to feel secure. Who positions herself above you and keeps you scrambling to measure up. We're going to understand how this dynamic forms, why men get trapped in it, how to recognize it early, and most importantly, how to handle it without losing yourself. Let's start with how you got here, because understanding the entry point is critical to understanding the trap. She didn't start as a nightmare, she started as a prize, and here's why. Our culture has spent decades telling men that strong, successful, independent women are the goal, the ideal. If you can attract one of these women, you've made it. You're not intimidated by female success. You're evolved. You're secure. You're man enough to handle a powerful woman. So when you meet her, this confident, accomplished, impressive woman, and she shows interest, you feel validated. You beat the competition. You're one of the rare men who can keep up with her. You're special. And that feeling of being chosen by someone selective, that's the hook. That's how she gets in. But here's what you didn't notice. The selection process never stopped. You thought the audition was over once she chose you. You thought you got the part, but you didn't get the part. You got a call back, and then another call back, and another. You're still auditioning, except now the script keeps changing, and nobody told you the lines. You're performing in a play where the director sussed her, keeps moving the goalposts and critiquing your delivery and threatening to recast your role if you don't improve. Let me paint the picture of what this looks like in practice, because the control doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up with a label. It seeps in through 1,000 small interactions that individually seem reasonable, but collectively construct a cage. Early on, she has standards. Okay, fine. Everyone has standards. She prefers you text back within a reasonable time. She likes when you plan dates thoughtfully. She appreciates effort. These sound like normal relationship expectations. But watch what happens over time. The reasonable time gets shorter. What was an hour becomes 30 minutes, becomes 10 minutes, becomes, why did it take you 3 minutes to respond? The thoughtful date planning becomes, why didn't you think of this detail I never mentioned but apparently expected? The standards aren't fixed. They're a moving target. And the movement is always in one direction. More attention, more effort, more anticipation of her needs, more mind reading, more proof that you care, that you're trying, that you're worthy. You're running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up, and she's standing beside it with a clipboard, marking down every stumble. Here's the psychological mechanism underneath. She has an ideal in her head. Not an ideal based on your actual behavior or your actual qualities, but an ideal assembled from movies, from past relationships, from fantasies, from her father, from some combination of sources that have created an impossible composite. You're being measured against this ideal constantly, and because the ideal isn't real, because no human being can embody a fantasy, you're always falling short. But she doesn't tell you the ideal is impossible. She tells you that you're not trying hard enough, that other men would do better, that if you really loved her, you'd meet the standard. The failure is positioned as yours, your inadequacy, your lack of effort, never the unreasonable nature of the expectation itself. Let me talk about how relationships become performance tests, because this is the core dynamic. In a healthy relationship, both people are figuring things out together. Mistakes happen, misunderstandings occur, and when they do, there's repair, there's conversation, there's mutual adjustment. I didn't like how that went leads to, okay, let's do it differently next time. It's collaboration. In the dominant woman dynamic, mistakes are grades. Every interaction is an assessment. Did you say the right thing? Did you respond correctly? Did you handle her mood properly? Did you anticipate the issue before it became an issue? You're being tested constantly, and the tests aren't announced. You're supposed to just know, and when you don't, you failed. Again. This creates an atmosphere of constant anxiety. You start monitoring yourself, filtering your words before you speak them, calculating how she'll react before you act. You're not being yourself anymore. You're being a version of yourself optimized to minimize negative reactions. You've become a people pleaser, except the only person you're pleasing is her. And the pleasing never quite works because the standard is always just beyond your reach. The dominant woman thrives in this dynamic, not because she's evil, but because it makes her feel secure. If you're constantly trying to please her, she knows you're invested. If you're constantly falling short, she stays in the superior position. If you're anxious about her approval, she retains control. The imbalance isn't a bug, it's the feature. It's how she regulates her own anxiety about abandonment or inadequacy. By keeping you in a position where you're the one worried about being enough. Let me talk about effort inflation, because this is where men lose themselves completely. You think, she's not happy with my current level of effort, so I'll increase it. I'll do more. I'll be more attentive, more thoughtful, more present, more everything. I'll prove that I'm serious, that I'm committed, that I'm the man she deserves. This seems logical. This seems like problem solving. If there's a deficit, fill the deficit. Here's what actually happens. You increase effort. She accepts the new baseline. The increased effort becomes expected, not appreciated. It's no longer impressive. It's standard. And because she's still measuring you against an impossible ideal, you're still falling short, just at a higher level of effort. So you increase again, and the pattern repeats. You're on a treadmill that you keep speeding up yourself, wondering why you're getting more exhausted while making no progress. And here's the cruel paradox: the more you give, the less she values it. Not because she's heartless, but because psychology works this way. Scarcity creates value. Abundance creates entitlement. When you're pouring effort into her constantly, that effort loses meaning. It becomes expected. Background noise. The special gestures become obligations. The sacrifices become assumptions. You thought giving more would earn more appreciation. Instead, it taught her that you'll keep giving regardless of how it's received. Meanwhile, your value in her eyes is dropping. Because the more you try to prove yourself, the more you communicate that you need her approval. And needing approval from someone is the opposite of being attractive to them. You've inverted the dynamic. She was initially drawn to you because you seemed confident, grounded, self-sufficient. Now you're acting like someone who needs her validation to feel okay about himself. She's not attracted to that. Nobody is. Let me talk about power imbalance through moral framing, because this is how control gets disguised as virtue. She doesn't say, "Do what I want because I want it." That's too obvious. That's too honest. Instead, she frames her demands as moral imperatives, as signs of maturity, as evidence of love. If you really cared, you'd do this. A real man would handle it this way. Grown adults don't act like that. She's taken her preferences and wrapped them in the language of right and wrong. Disagreeing with her isn't a difference of opinion, it's a character flaw. This is devastatingly effective. because now you can't even resist without feeling like you're in the wrong. You're not just refusing her request and you're being immature. You're being selfish. You're not showing love properly. The framing makes resistance feel like moral failure, so you comply, not because you agree, but because you don't want to be the bad guy. And she's constructed the situation so that not giving her what she wants automatically makes you the bad guy. Watch how this plays out. She wants you to stop hanging out with a certain friend. She doesn't say, "I'm uncomfortable and that's my issue." She says, "That friend is a bad influence. If you respected me, you wouldn't spend time with people who disrespect relationships." Now, it's not about her comfort. It's about respect, about maturity, about whether you're the kind of man who makes good choices. You're not negotiating preferences. You're defending your character. Or she wants access to your phone. She doesn't say, "I have trust issues I'm working through." She says, "People in healthy relationships have transparency. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't mind." Now refusing becomes evidence of guilt. Boundaries become suspicious. Privacy becomes proof of deception. The framing makes her invasive requests sound like common sense, and your resistance sound like confession. This is control masquerading as standards, and it works because the framing is accepted before the behavior is examined. Once you're arguing on her terms, and once you're defending why you're not immature or disrespectful or hiding something, you've already lost. Because the conversation is happening inside a frame where she's right and you're on trial. Let me talk about emotional pressure as a control tool, because this is her most powerful weapon. She doesn't need to yell. She doesn't need to issue ultimatums. She just needs to withdraw, to get quiet, to sigh, to speak in that tone, you know, the one that communicates disappointment so clearly that words aren't necessary. This silence is louder than shouting. This coldness is more cutting than insults, because it positions you as the problem without her having to argue the case. You come home and something's off. You ask what's wrong. Nothing. But it's not nothing. The energy has shifted. She's distant, barely engaged, short answers, no warmth, and you're left to figure out what you did wrong. This is the punishment, and the punishment works because humans are wired to resolve conflict. The tension is unbearable, so you scramble, you review the day, you think through every interaction, you try to identify the crime so you can confess and restore peace, and maybe you figure it out. Maybe you apologize for something you didn't think was a big deal, but apparently was, and the warmth returns, temporarily, until the next infraction you didn't know was an infraction. You've been trained, like a lab rat learning that certain behaviors lead to shocks, except the shocks are emotional withdrawal, and the behaviors that trigger them keep changing, so you can never quite learn the pattern. You just stay in a constant state of anxiety, trying to avoid the next withdrawal, or you try to have a conversation about the dynamic itself. You try to address the pattern, and here's what happens. Either she escalates, you're attacking her, you're making her the villain, you're turning this around on her when you're the one with the problem, or she shuts down. She goes completely cold, won't engage, walks away, leaves you talking to yourself. Both responses accomplish the same thing. They make addressing the issue more painful than tolerating it. So you stop trying to address it, you tolerate it, which means it continues. Let me talk about the gradual erosion of identity, because this is the real cost. You used to have hobbies, friends, interests independent of her. You had a life that was yours, but slowly, incrementally, piece by piece, you've given it up. Not because she demanded it explicitly, because the cost of maintaining it became too high. Every time you went out with friends, there was tension afterward. Every time you spent time on a hobby, there was a comment about how that time could have been spent on the relationship. Every pursuit that didn't include her became evidence that she wasn't your priority, not in those words. But the message was clear, and the message was backed by emotional consequences, coldness, disappointment, withdrawal, that made maintaining independence feel selfish. So you stopped. One thing at a time. First the weekly poker game, then the gym sessions that cut into couple time, then the friendships that required too much explanation, then the ambitions that seemed to threaten her position. Piece by piece, the life you had before her disappeared. And what replaced it? Her. The relationship. The constant work of keeping her satisfied, which is all-consuming because she's never satisfied. You look in the mirror one day and you don't recognize yourself. You've become someone who asks permission, who self-censors constantly, who filters every decision through the question, how will she react? You're not a partner, you're a subordinate. And you got here so gradually that you can't point to the moment you lost yourself. You just know that the person you were, the person she was initially attracted to no longer exists. And the person you've become is someone neither of you respects. Let me talk about learned helplessness in men, because this is the endpoint of the dynamic if it goes unchecked. Learned helplessness is a psychological phenomenon. When an animal is subjected to inescapable negative stimuli repeatedly, it stops trying to escape even when escape becomes possible. It learns that resistance is futile, that nothing it does changes the outcome, so it just endures, passively, hopelessly. This happens to men in dominant-woman relationships. They try to please her. Doesn't work. They try to set boundaries. She escalates until he backs down. They try to leave. She pulls him back with promises of change that never materialize. Every escape route gets closed. Every attempt to improve things fails. Eventually he stops trying. He just endures. He accepts that this is his life now, that this is what he deserves, that this is the cost of being with her. And the most insidious part? He starts taking responsibility for her behavior. He tells himself, if I were better, she wouldn't treat me this way. If I were more attentive, more successful, more whatever, she'd be happy. He's internalized her framing. He's accepted that her dissatisfaction is his fault, that the dynamic is his failure. The oppressor has convinced the victim that the oppression is justified. I've talked to men who stayed through infidelity, through public humiliation, through treatment that would make their friends cringe if they saw it. And when you ask why they stayed, they say, for the kids, to keep the family together, because I made a commitment. These sound noble, but often they're just rationalizations for learned helplessness. He's not staying because leaving is wrong. He's staying because he's learned that leaving is impossible. The cage isn't locked, but he doesn't know that anymore. Let me give you the red flags, the early warning signs that you're dealing with this dynamic before it destroys you. Red flag 1. You're constantly justifying yourself. Normal conversations require you to explain your reasoning, defend your choices, prove your intentions. You can't just say something, you have to build a case for why saying it is valid. Red flag 2. Her humor has an edge. She makes jokes at your expense. Little digs about your job, your appearance, your intelligence, your manhood. And when you express discomfort, you're told you're too sensitive. You can't take a joke. The criticism is delivered with a smile, which makes resisting it look weak. Red flag 3. You feel guilty without clear cause. There's a vague sense that you've disappointed her, but you can't identify the specific infraction. The guilt is ambient, atmospheric, always present. Red flag 4. You're afraid to communicate honestly. You filter your thoughts before speaking. You calculate how she'll react before you act. You're managing her emotions more than expressing your own. Authentic communication has been replaced by strategic communication designed to avoid negative reactions. Red flag 5. You notice the double standard. She can do things you're not allowed to do. She can speak to you in ways you can't speak to her. She can have boundaries you can't have. The rules are different depending on who's applying them. And when you point this out, you're told you're keeping score. You're being petty. You're missing the point. If you're experiencing most of these, you're not in a relationship. You're in a psychological experiment testing how much submission you'll tolerate. And the answer she's looking for is infinite. Let me talk about the futility of proving yourself. Because this is where most men waste years. You think, I just need to show her. I need to prove that I'm worthy. I need to demonstrate my love, my commitment. my value through actions, grand gestures, consistent effort, sacrifices that prove how much I care. Once she sees how much I'm willing to do, she'll finally be satisfied. The testing will stop. The acceptance will arrive. This never happens. The testing doesn't stop because the testing isn't about gathering information. It's about maintaining the dynamic. She doesn't need to know if you're worthy. She needs you to keep trying to prove it. Your effort to prove yourself is the proof. Proof that you've accepted the subordinate position. Proof that she has power. Proof that the hierarchy is intact. Every time you try to impress her, you reinforce that her approval matters more than your self-respect. Every time you sacrifice to please her, you confirm that her comfort is more important than yours. Every time you tolerate disrespect to avoid conflict, you teach her that disrespect is acceptable. You think you're building the relationship. You're actually destroying your position in it. Here's what actually happens with attraction. It operates on perceived value, and perceived value comes from self-direction, boundaries, options, and the willingness to walk away. The more you chase her approval, the less valuable you become. The more you tolerate mistreatment, the less attractive you are. You can't prove yourself into attraction. You can only prove yourself out of it. So what do you actually do? How do you handle a dominant woman without losing yourself? First, you establish a boundary-based frame. This is non-negotiable. Boundaries are the foundation, not rules for her, rules for you, lines you won't cross, treatment you won't accept, a clear sense of what's acceptable and what isn't. These boundaries exist independent of her reaction. She can rage, she can withdraw, she can threaten. Your boundaries remain. This looks like, I don't have conversations where I'm being spoken to disrespectfully. When you're ready to talk calmly, I'm here. Then you walk away, not angrily, calmly. You've stated a boundary and enforced it through your own action. You didn't try to control her behavior. You controlled your presence. Or, I'm not checking in every hour. I'll reach out when I have something to share, and you can do the same. Then you stop checking in every hour, regardless of her reaction. She can call it inconsiderate. She can call it selfish. Your boundary stands because it's about what you're willing to do, not about what she wants you to do. Second, you respond to demands with questions instead of compliance. When she tells you what you should do, you ask, why is that important to you? When she frames something as what mature people do, you ask, where did that standard come from? Questions expose the framing. They force her to argue for the position instead of assuming it. And often, when she has to actually argue for unreasonable demands, the unreasonableness becomes visible. Third, you emphasize choice over obligation. You do things because you choose to, not because you have to. This is a psychological frame shift. When you text her, you do it because you wanted to connect, not because you're required to check in. When you plan a date, you do it because you thought it would be enjoyable, not because you're expected to perform. The internal framing matters. Choice preserves power. Obligation surrenders it. Fourth, you filter ruthlessly. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not every impressive woman is relationship material. Compatibility is rare, and some personalities, dominant personalities who thrive on control and imbalance, they're simply not compatible with healthy partnership. You screen for cooperation, for respect, for reciprocity, for gratitude. If these aren't present early, they won't develop later. Don't try to create compatibility through effort. Select for it. Fifth, you recognize that detachment resets dynamics. When you're caught in the spiral, when you're invested, reactive, emotional, you have no leverage. Detachment creates leverage, not cold detachment, just emotional neutrality. You're no longer affected by her moods. You're no longer scrambling for her approval. You're no longer organizing your life around avoiding her disapproval. This looks like she gets cold. You don't react. You continue about your day. She's testing whether her emotional withdrawal still controls you. When it doesn't, the power dynamic shifts. Often this is when she suddenly becomes warmer, more affectionate, more interested. Not because you won, but because the dynamic recalibrated. She's no longer sure she has you. An uncertainty creates attraction, but, and this is critical, you don't detach to manipulate her back into treating you well. You detach because you've decided that your self-respect is more important than this relationship continuing. If detachment results in her improving, fine. If it results in the relationship ending, also fine. Either outcome is better than continuing the subordinate position you were in. Sixth, you play by your rules or don't play. This is the summary principle. You cannot fix a dominant woman's psychology. You cannot outperform her impossible standards. You cannot sacrifice enough to earn permanent acceptance. You cannot love her out of her need for control. The only thing you control is whether you participate in the dynamic. Some men hear this and think, "But I love her. I understand." But love doesn't mean tolerating abuse. Love doesn't mean losing yourself. Love doesn't mean accepting a subordinate position in your own relationship. Love should make your life better, not turn it into an endless performance review you're always failing. If she's capable of partnership, if she can adjust when you set boundaries, if she can respect limits, if she can take accountability, then the dynamic can change. But that requires her willingness to change, not just your willingness to endure. Most dominant women don't change, not because they can't, but because the dynamic serves them. It makes them feel secure. It protects their ego. It gives them control, and giving up control feels threatening. So you make a decision. Either she meets you in a balanced dynamic or you exit. Not as a threat, not as manipulation, as a genuine boundary. You're willing to be in partnership. You're not willing to be in subordination. One of those is a relationship. The other is a job you're not getting paid for. Let me close with what I want you to understand. The dominant woman isn't powerful. She's afraid. The control is compensation for deep insecurity. The testing is anxiety about whether you'll stay. The impossible standards are protection against vulnerability. The dominance is a defense mechanism that worked in childhood and calcified in adulthood. Understanding this doesn't mean tolerating it. Her wounds aren't your responsibility. Her fears aren't your job to manage. Her need for control doesn't justify controlling you. You can have compassion while having boundaries. You can understand her psychology while refusing to be destroyed by it. The goal isn't to conquer her, isn't to tame her, isn't to fix her. The goal is to maintain yourself, to refuse the subordinate position, to insist on partnership or accept incompatibility. Some women are ready for partnership, some aren't. Your job is to distinguish between the two and respond accordingly. For now, tell me in the comments, have you been in this dynamic? What was the moment you recognized it? What did you do? Share the pattern so other men can see it before they're 3 years deep. That's it for today. Stop auditioning, start choosing. And remember, you can't negotiate